Before I get started in talking a little bit about what we've accomplished or what's changed in the last 10 years, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here today. And we have this program at Sunoco, and it's a very good program. A couple times a year, we'll bring in all the most recent hires, and it doesn't matter what department they're in, whether they were in accounting or they're project managers or whatever. And we tell them what we do as a company, because we want them to know that they're not a purchasing agent. They're a purchasing agent for a pipeline company. And we had become aware that a lot of people in the company really didn't understand our business and everything that we did, and we wanted to understand it better. And so in these presentations, I talk about our pipeline integrity program. And I start out with a question, and it's, where were you when? And I start out asking, how many people remember exactly, very vividly, where they were, who they were with, and everything about when they first heard that President Kennedy had been shot? Well, anymore, I'm about the only one raising my hand. So then I move it up a little bit. Well, how many people remember exactly where they were, who they were with, what it looked like at that time when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon? Well, I might get a couple then. Okay. So I bring it up to more to date. How about 9/11? And I'm not saying, do you remember what happened then? But do you remember where you were? You remember everything about what was around you, who talked to you, who was with you, and everything about that day, crystal clear as if it happened yesterday. And then I get all the hands. You bet. And all those events are crystallized in our memory because they hit us so deeply. They were so important to us. They changed us. They changed who we are. It's what psychologists call a significant emotional event. And so I asked them then, who remembers where they were and what they were doing, who they were with on June 10th, 1999? Again, I'm the only one raising my hand in those meetings. And I know that here, there are people that do remember. And then I tell them why I remember that day. And I'm not going to go into all the details here in this forum, but I'll tell you that the story that I tell them starts with sitting in my office at Arco Pipeline Company, where I was an integrity manager, and Larry Shakely, the president of the company, coming to my door and telling me that a pipeline that we were in a joint venture with in Washington had a leak and a fire. There were some injuries. At that time, we didn't know about the fatalities. And the story leads to sometime later when I went and visited the park. And I walked through the park and out of the park, down a path to a cul-de-sac. And I stood there in that cul-de-sac, and I imagined the horror that must have gone on in that place that day. And I turned back towards that path I had come down, and for that one very brief fraction of a millisecond that your imagination will let you do it, I imagined my son coming down that path. And I won't for a second try to tell anybody in here or even begin to suggest that in that flash I experienced anything close to what the people who had to live through it experienced and the people who have to live with the aftermath. But I can tell you that in that flash, I had my significant emotional event. And it was in that moment that I realized that this isn't only, I didn't only think that this was something very important that I did. That's when I began to feel it in every fiber of how important managing pipeline safety is. And so I want to tell you that it's really a privilege for me to come here and speak to the Pipeline Safety Trust, who is rooted in that tragedy, about the progress that we've made since that day, and since that disaster. And in this program, that was also rooted in it. And I want to start out with one thing that I know has been somewhat controversial. but it's something that we've learned in managing integrity in that time and in looking at the risk factors. There's no real correlation of old versus new. The methods that were employed to install a pipeline, yep, there are risk factors there. And as you go back in time, the methods that were employed were not as good as the ones that are generally in use now. So that those methods then are risk factors. The materials that are used, yes, you bet. Pipelines are made much better materials now than they were back then. But this is, again, a risk factor to be managed. And cycling, pressure cycling, yes. The more that a pipeline has cycled in pressures over time, the greater the risk in that particular pipeline. This is all risk data that we need to know to accurately assess the risk of a certain pipeline or a given pipeline or a given segment of pipeline. But the number of years themselves is not in itself a risk factor. So to say a pipeline is 70 years old and therefore it's high risk isn't correct unless we know the methods, the materials, the cycling, and other factors associated with it. And we need to go and get that data and understand that data. We learned that coating is our friend and our foe. And I put plastic back tape there at the top because that's something that's been in the dialogue much lately. Not plastic back tape in itself is not an issue, but it goes back again to the methods. How was it installed? What type of pipeline was it installed on? Shrink sleeves. For a while, we thought that was great. That was a great way to apply coatings for the joints. When we installed new sections, the new joint of pipe comes in and most of it's coated, but the last couple feet on each end where it's going to be welded are not, and we have to coat those in the field. And for a while, the shrink sleeves, we slide them up, heat them up, they would shrink onto there. That was great, but we're finding that a lot of those weren't such a good idea. They're not protecting the pipe as well as they should. So in those pipelines where we know we have shrink sleeves, we watch more closely. It's a risk factor. External MIC, that was a little bit of a surprise to us, and it's kind of associated too with the plastic back tape where it can cause a gap in there. We had been looking for MIC on the inside of the pipe. That's where it's usually found, where microbes will will find an environment where they thrive, and then they secrete enzymes that cause corrosion. Well, that same thing can happen under tape. We're finding. And while we can put biocides on the inside of the pipe to control it, it's a little more problematic on the outside of the pipe. Another risk factor to manage. Improved tool technology. If you didn't pick up one of these cards, they're really, not these cards, that's a credit card. You want that? You can have that. My wife picks that one up. Oh, I don't have one. I must put it in a different pocket. Sorry about that. Anyway, the cards that Craig had put back there, that show the different tools, and you notice there's one in there that's good for features that are axial, they run along the pipe. Those that are circumferential run sideways along the pipe. Well, we're now looking at tools that magnetize spirally, so we can see both of those at the same time. Residual magnetism tools that tell us where there's hard spots in the pipeline. That'll tell us that 2% dent. Is it really a smooth 2% dent, or was that an 8% dent that re-rounded under pressure? Very different level of risk associated with those. CPCM, this is pretty exciting technology that we're just experimenting with now. First time we ran it a couple of years ago with the manufacturer as a test. Didn't work out so well. We just ran it again, much more encouraging results. What this tool does is take the place of close interval survey, where we go down the pipeline, somebody has to walk along the pipeline, stringing wire behind them, measuring the potential of the cathodic protection system at every step along the way. Well, that's good, and we do get a lot of good information that way. The problem is what happens when you get to a river or a swamp, and different soils conduct differently, and so the results are often hard to get consistency on them. What this does, this is a tool that goes through the inside of the pipe and can actually measure the voltage from point to point inside the pipe, from the front of the pig to the back of the pig. It's a very, very small voltage change, but it can read it, and from that can tell us the effectiveness of our cathodic protection. And we can get all the pipe that way, and nobody has to go out there and step on a snake or whatever. And the result, though, of all of this is we've got more features that have been identified for review, not less. Back when we started IMP, the common thought was for long-range planning that we're going to get through this first wave of tools and we're going to get all these things that are out there. And when we come back the second time, we won't find nearly as many, and then the third time there'll be hardly any, and things will just get better. And in our long-range planning, we said that we'll be having to spend less money on this in the future. I was reminded the other day of the late Rich Turley, who was one of the great minds of integrity management, and unfortunately we lost him a few years ago. He was from Marathon. He was like a lone voice back at that time saying, no, it's not going to go down. If anything, it'll go up. The technology is going to get better. We're going to be able to find more kinds of things. We're going to understand things out there. He nailed it. He was exactly right. And that's exactly been the situation. Injurious versus non-injurious. We're learning more about what kinds of features that we see in the tools and the data really are injurious. And we need to understand that, because every time we go out there and stick a shovel in the ground, we're inducing risk in that pipeline system. In my time on the data mining team, a few years ago, one of the first times we looked at excavation damage and who was doing excavation damage, we were surprised to find that 1 out of 5 times that the pipelines got struck, it was first or second party, meaning either the pipeline operator or their contractors. Wow. Well, yeah, that's something that we need to get better at, but still makes the point. Every time we go out there and dig, there's risk involved with that as well. And understanding this helps us to expend those finite resources that we have on the real risks, because the reality is the resources are finite, and it's not just because we're businesses. It wouldn't matter if it was a government or one of the world's great religions that was doing this. There's a limit to the amount of resource that can be applied. We've got to make sure we use them smartly, and we use them where we get the most value in reducing risk out there. So better information then gives us a better application of those resources. And we learned that we really need to integrate traditional integrity management. When I first started doing integrity management in the mid-90s, it was pigging and digging. That's what integrity management was. Well, now we know there's a lot more to it. It means integrating information with all the threats to a pipeline, everything that can result in a release or an accident involving a pipeline. Training and qualification, making sure people understand their jobs and that they're qualified to do it. Damage prevention, public awareness, control room management, all of these things and many more all have to do, all in some way contribute to maintaining the integrity of pipelines. And so our integrity management programs have to integrate them. We also learned a lot about our individual pipelines and pipeline segments through this process, because all this repair work has exposed miles of pipe that may not have otherwise have been examined. And so we learn more about the as-built condition, what's really out there. Yep, we do have the construction documents, but what really happened out there? What really got put in the ground and how did it get put there? We got a much clearer understanding now. We understand now more about the effectiveness of our cathodic protection and coatings and other corrosion strategies. And we learned about the durability of various designs and those methods that I talked about earlier, and which ones are higher risk and which ones are not as high. And so, again, we can focus our resources where the higher risks are. And in regulatory compliance inspections, we learned that our regulator raises the bar every year, as it should. And what we presented way back in that first round of inspections for our integrity management programs and how we were assessing risk and evaluating our pipelines, if we presented that same program now, it would be absolutely inefficient or ineffective. And also, through these inspections, the inspectors have the opportunity, and they have done so, to spread best practices because they see all of it. They see all the companies. They see what's really working. They see great ideas. And while we try to share them among ourselves, this is another way by which we can learn them because they identify them. They find it, they influence us when they do see, and sometimes I will even get something called a notice of amendment that really reinforces the idea that there's a best practice out there that I should consider. And we learn the importance of collaboration. Within the industry, like the Pipeline Integrity Work Group, when that was created after the IMP rule as a subcommittee of the OTG, the Operations Technical Group, which is the standards setting committee for pipelines at API. Also the Pipeline Information Exchange, and I participated myself in the data mining team, as I mentioned, PICS, the Integrity Work Group, the OTG, the Performance Excellence team, and I'm going to tell you something. The people that I see in those meetings, at every one of those meetings, are as committed to pipeline safety as I am. They may not have shared the same experience that brought them to that level. May have been a different experience, but every single one of them is. And I can tell you, in not one of those meetings have I been the smartest person in the room, but I've always left those meetings smarter than when I went in there. And collaborating with regulators. And collaboration sounds like a bad word, but in communicating, exchanging ideas. They have workshops, we have workshops. They have meetings, we have meetings. Working back and forth, exchanging those ideas, getting to those best practices that we all need to employ and that they should expect us to use. Emergency responders, and working with emergency responders so that they understand better who we are, and what we do. The challenge here is the magnitude of it. Emergency responders, on ours, we took a look to see how many firehouses there were within 5 miles of our facilities. 6,000. And the public, because we truly believe, as has been said several times here today, and as Craig said earlier today, an educated public, educated neighbors on our pipelines are an asset. Room for improvement. There are a few areas. Impact analysis, they need to be more, the HCA impacts, where the HCAs are, need to be more accurate, need to be more current. We need to keep them up to date. Need to understand the factors that go into them better. Improve transport models to see what sections of pipeline that are not in an HCA could affect an HCA because a spill could transport to that area, as somebody mentioned earlier today, coming downstream to their house. And more testing. We started going back and looking at historical releases, comparing it to our models to see if the model was accurate. Is that really where it went? We need more metrics, and especially leading indicators. And they need to be more surgical with regard to specific systems because the risks are different in different segments, then the metrics that go along with those have to also be specific. And we need to be focused on our preventive measures that keep things from happening in the first place. That's what we need to measure, and integration with the risk models. Okay. Data integration, we've said plenty on that already. There's a lot of data. We're getting more data, and integrating it and making sense of it is still a challenge. And matching requirements with the current technology to find out what really is injurious so that we're not out there spending time excavating things that are lower risk when we should be looking at things that are higher risk. And a standard framework for management systems, identifying what are the elements of management system. And IMP in itself is not a management system. It has to incorporate all those other programs that I had listed before as well, and need to have standard characteristics of procedures and feedback and measurements and continuous improvement, and implementation processes to ensure they're effective. Inline inspection tools are smarter. They're still not geniuses. We still need some improvements there with their accuracy and their durability. They're getting better. We can run them in more lines now because they're stronger. They're more durable for the challenges that we find in lines like old style welds but we need to make them more so. And the government agencies need to continue to raise the inspector expertise so that they do best recognize what best practices are, and when they do come and understand our business better, they better understand what is a best practice with relation to us. So the bottom line, we've expanded massive resources to improve the technology and practices of integrity management. We had great improvements at the beginning. It's starting to slow down in our performance. We can't rest on the plateau. We have to get even better. We understand that. Our finite resources have to be applied where they yield the greatest benefit and risk reduction. And the regulations are necessary. I'm a big fan of regulations. I really am, because they level the playing field. But they got to be, they have to be fit for purpose, and we have to be sure that they really are the best practice for a given situation. Thanks for your time.
Okay. Sorry, we've been